The distress beacon appeared on the scanner like a ghost signal, weak and stuttering through the empty dark between star systems. Gordon Reeves had been hauling cargo through the outer margin for 12 years, and he knew that most distress signals out here meant pirates, salvage traps, or corpses floating in dead ships. Smart haulers ignored them and kept moving. He stared at the blinking red dot on his navigation screen. His fingers drummed against the armrest of his pilot seat. The long haul was 3 weeks into a 6-week journey, carrying mining equipment to some forgotten colony on the edge of mapped space. Nobody was waiting for him. Nobody ever did anymore. Gordon reached forward and changed course. 2 hours later, the derelict vessel filled his viewport. It was unlike any ship design he recognized, all smooth curves and dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. No running lights. No power signatures. Just floating dead in the void with that beacon screaming into empty space. He suited up and crossed the gap between ships on a tether line. The airlock was already open, which made his skin crawl. The inside of the alien vessel was cold enough that his breath fogged inside his helmet. Emergency lighting flickered in strips along the walls, casting everything in sickly green. The corridor split into dozens of smaller passages, each one barely wide enough for him to squeeze through. Gordon followed the nearest one and found a small chamber. Inside was a transparent pod, and inside the pod was a small alien creature. Dead. Its silver fur was matted, and dark plates along its spine had lost their shine. He found another chamber. Another pod, another small body, then another. Gordon's stomach turned as he realized what he was seeing. This was not a cruise ship. This was something else entirely. Every pod contained a juvenile, each one roughly the same size, each one dead or dying. Some had been gone for days based on the decomposition. Others looked fresher. He counted 17 chambers before he found one where the occupant was still breathing. The creature was smaller than the others, thin to the point of starvation. Its chest barely moved. The silver fur was patchy and dull, but its eyes opened when Gordon pressed his gloved hand against the pod, and they focused on him with an intelligence that made him catch his breath. Gordon did not think. He simply acted. He overrode the pod controls, gathered the tiny alien into his arms, and carried it back to his ship. It weighed almost nothing, all bones and loose skin. By the time he had it in the cargo bay, wrapped in thermal blankets and hooked to every medical scanner he owned, his hands were shaking. The database had limited information about the species: Vorathi, reclusive, carnivorous, hostile to outsiders. The medical data was even worse. Just basic anatomy scans and a warning that Vorathi were considered dangerous. Nothing about how to treat a dying child. Gordon improvised. He mixed nutrient paste with water and carefully fed it through a tube. He monitored body temperature and adjusted the heating elements. He cleaned infected wounds and applied medical gel that probably was not designed for alien biology, but was all he had. The cub did not die that first night. Or the second. By the third day, it was strong enough to lift its head. Gordon sat beside the makeshift bed in the cargo bay, eating a ration bar and watching the small creature sleep. He had sent reports to every authority channel he could access, explaining what he had found, requesting medical assistance and information. Nobody had responded. Out here in the deep routes, you were on your own. The cub's eyes opened. They were dark like polished stone, with vertical pupils that contracted in the light. It looked at Gordon without fear, just curiosity. Then it made a sound, a low rumbling that started deep in its chest and rose into a clicking purr. Gordon smiled despite himself. "Hey there, little one. You feeling better?" The cub tilted its head, watching his mouth form words. It tried to imitate the sound, producing a strangled chirp that made Gordon laugh. "That's all right. We'll work on it." He reached out slowly, letting the cub sniff his hand. After a moment, it pressed its nose against his palm. The nose was cold and slightly damp. "I'm going to call you Lucky," Gordon said, "because that's what we both need to be right now." Lucky made that purring click sound again and closed its eyes, settling back into sleep. Gordon stayed there beside it, one hand resting gently on the small body to feel it breathe. He thought about the 17 other chambers he had seen, all those children left alone in the dark. He did not understand what he had stumbled into. He did not know that he had just violated laws older than human spaceflight. He did not know that the creature sleeping under his hand was supposed to be dead, that its survival would challenge the foundations of an entire civilization. Gordon Reeves only knew that he had found a child dying alone, and he could not walk away from that. Everything else would have to sort itself out later. The ship hummed around them as it pushed deeper into unexplored space, carrying a lonely cargo hauler and the smallest Varathi, who ever survived what was never meant to be survived. Behind them, the derelict death ship continued broadcasting its ghost signal into the void, a message that nobody would answer and nobody would understand until it was far too late to turn back. Lucky was stealing his food again. Gordon watched from the doorway as the small Varathi cub crept across the cargo bay floor, moving with the careful precision of a natural hunter. 2 weeks had passed since the rescue, and Lucky had transformed from a dying skeleton into something more alive, though still painfully thin. The cub reached the supply locker, stood on its back legs, and used those clever little hands to open the container where Gordon kept his ration bars. "You know I can see you, right?" Gordon said. Lucky froze, then slowly turned around with a ration bar clutched in both hands. The cub's ears flattened against its head in what Gordon had learned meant embarrassment or guilt. Then Lucky held out the bar toward him, offering to share. Gordon laughed and walked over, sitting down on the floor beside the cub. "Keep it. You need the calories more than I do." Lucky's ears perked up and the cub made that happy clicking purr, tearing into the bar with small sharp teeth. Gordon had learned a lot about Varathi biology through observation, since the databases were useless. They were obligate carnivores but could digest some plant proteins. They were naturally nocturnal but adapted quickly to other schedules. They were incredibly intelligent. That last part worried him more than he wanted to admit. He had finally received responses to his distress calls. The first came from a trade station administrator who simply sent back a document titled Varathi Cultural Database, Restricted Access. Gordon had read it 3 times, each time feeling sicker than the last. The ship he had found was called a trial vessel. The Varathi placed all their cubs aboard such ships at age 3 and sent them into deep space for 60 days. No food, no water, no adults. The cubs who survived the trial were welcomed back into society as full members. The ones who died were considered too weak to carry forward the bloodline. It was not an accident. It was not a tragedy. It was intentional. Gordon had looked at Lucky after reading that really looked. The cub was playing with a piece of wire, bending it into different shapes with complete focus. This child had been thrown away on purpose, left to starve in the dark because some ancient culture decided that was how you proved your worth. The second message had come from the Varathi themselves. It was brief and carried the weight of absolute authority. "Human vessel long haul, you have interfered with sacred rites. Return the cub to Varathi space immediately for proper cultural reintegration. Failure to comply will result in severe consequences." Lucky noticed Gordon's expression and climbed into his lap, pressing that cold nose against his chin. The cub was getting bigger every day but still fit easily in his arms. Gordon held on tight. "I'm not taking you back there," he whispered. "I don't care what their laws say." Lucky could not understand the words yet, but seemed to understand the tone. The cub settled against his chest, purring. Over the following days, Gordon changed their course. He deleted the navigation logs and shut down the long-range transmitter. The long haul turned away from the core systems and headed toward the lawless frontier, regions where people did not ask questions and authorities did not have jurisdiction. Lucky watched everything. Gordon did with intense focus. When Gordon performed maintenance on the ship's engines, Lucky sat beside him and handed him tools before he asked for them. When Gordon cooked meals in the tiny galley, Lucky stood on a chair and watched every step, eventually starting to imitate the motions. One day, Gordon came back from checking the cargo hold and found Lucky in the pilot's seat. The cub had climbed up and was examining the controls with careful touches, not pressing anything but clearly trying to understand how it all worked. Gordon's breath caught in his throat. "You want to learn how to fly?" he asked. Lucky looked back at him and made a questioning chirp. Gordon sat down in the co-pilot seat and started pointing at controls, naming them one by one. Lucky listened with complete attention, those dark eyes tracking every movement. By the end of the hour, the cub could point to the throttle control, the navigation panel, and the emergency shutdown when Gordon asked. They fell into a routine. Gordon would work and Lucky would help. or at least try to help. The cub learned to recognize alarms and would run to Gordon when something needed attention. Lucky learned to use the food dispenser and the water recycler. Small things, but they added up to something that felt like family. Gordon had lost his family years ago. A transport accident that took his wife and daughter in one terrible moment. He had taken the long-haul cargo work because being alone in space was easier than being alone on a planet full of memories. But now he talked constantly, narrating everything he did so Lucky could learn the language, and Lucky was learning. The cub started making sounds that approximated human words. Gordon came first, mangled and strange but unmistakable. Then ship and food, and yes. 5 weeks into their journey, Gordon was sleeping in the pilot's chair when he felt something warm draped over him. He opened his eyes to find Lucky had pulled a blanket from the sleeping quarters and carefully laid it over him, tucking the edges in just like Gordon did for the cub every night. Lucky stood there looking proud and uncertain at the same time, waiting to see if this was the right thing to do. Gordon felt his eyes burn with tears he had not shed in years. He reached out and pulled Lucky into a gentle hug. The cub squeaked in surprise, then wrapped small arms around his neck and purred so loud it vibrated through both their bodies. "Thank you, Lucky," Gordon managed to say. "That was very kind." They stayed like that for a long time, human and Varathi, holding on to each other in the darkness between stars. Gordon knew he had made himself a fugitive. He knew the Varathi might hunt him for what he had done. He knew bringing Lucky into human space would bring questions he could not easily answer. He did not care. This small creature had been thrown away like garbage, and Gordon had seen too much death in his life to accept that one more child should die alone in the dark, just because tradition demanded it. The long haul flew on through unexplored space, its distress beacon disabled, its official course abandoned. Inside, a lonely man and a rescued cub built something neither of them had expected to find. A reason to keep going. Lucky fell asleep in Gordon's arms, safe and warm and completely trusting. Gordon looked out at the endless stars and made a promise to himself and to the small life depending on him. Whatever came next, he would not let Lucky down. Not ever. 5 years could change everything. The cargo hauler that limped into Frontier Station Osiris looked like it had been through a war. Scorch marks covered the hull and mismatched repair panels gave it a patchwork appearance, but the ship moved with confidence, sliding into the docking bay with practiced ease. Inside the station, merchants and travelers looked up as 2 figures emerged from the airlock. The first was human, older than his years with gray streaking through dark hair and deep lines around his eyes. He wore a cargo hauler's practical jumpsuit and carried himself with the relaxed readiness of someone who had seen trouble before. My second figure made people step back. The Varathi stood 7 feet tall with silver fur that caught the light like metal. Dark plates ran along the spine and shoulders, natural armor that spoke of predator ancestry. Powerful limbs moved with liquid grace, and intelligent dark eyes surveyed the station with careful attention. The alien wore modified human clothing, a vest with many pockets and sturdy pants designed for work. Gordon Reeves kept one hand near the small pistol on his belt, not because he expected trouble, but because frontier stations attracted the kind of people who might see a rare Varathi as a prize worth taking. Beside him, Kivnal carried 2 heavy equipment cases like they weighed nothing. His attention split between watching the crowd and watching Gordon. They had been partners for 5 years now, ever since Lucky grew too big for Gordon to keep calling him by that name. Kivnal had chosen his Varathi name himself after learning to read the cultural databases. It meant Deathless One in his native language, a small act of defiance against the culture that had tried to kill him. "Supply depot is on level 3, Gordon said, leading the way through the crowded market section. "We get the parts, refuel, and get back out. Nice and simple." Kivnal made a low rumbling sound that Gordon had learned meant amusement. "You say that every time, Uncle. It is never simple." Gordon grinned. Kivnal had started calling him Uncle 3 years ago, explaining through halting human language that the Varathi had a concept for a male who raises another's offspring. The term did not translate perfectly, but Uncle was close enough. Gordon had cried when he first heard it. They reached the supply depot and Gordon began negotiating for replacement parts while Kivnal examined the merchandise with a practiced eye. The Varathi had a gift for engineering that Gordon had cultivated over the years. Kivnal could look at a component and immediately understand how it functioned. often finding ways to improve efficiency that the original manufacturers had missed. The power coupling is substandard, Kivnal said in perfect human common tongue, holding up a part. This one will fail within 200 hours of operation. The merchant, a squat alien with too many arms, bristled. That's certified equipment. You calling me a liar? Kivnal tilted his head in that distinctly predatory way that made most beings nervous. I am calling you ignorant of your own inventory. Look at the serial number. This is from the recalled batch produced on Station 7. Would you like me to show you the manufacturing defect that will cause catastrophic failure? The merchant looked at the part, then at his inventory manifest, then deflated. Fine, I'll get you one from the good batch. But the price goes up. The price stays the same, Gordon said calmly. Or we report to station security that you're selling recalled parts as certified equipment. That's a violation of about 12 different trade regulations. They got the parts at the original price. As they loaded supplies back onto the long haul, Kivnal suddenly went very still. Gordon recognized that posture immediately and his hand dropped to his weapon. What is it? Vorathi, Kivnal said quietly. 3 of them, armed, moving through the market section. Gordon's blood went cold. In 5 years, they had never encountered other Vorathi. They had stayed in frontier space specifically to avoid that possibility. Did they see you? I do not think so. But uncle, if they are here... Kivnal's ears flattened against his skull, a sign of deep distress. The trial ships operate on cycles. They may be looking for new cubs who survived. Or looking for you, Gordon thought but did not say. Instead he said, get inside the ship. Start pre-flight. We're leaving. Uncle. I can fight if... Inside. Now. Gordon's voice carried the tone that Kivnal had learned over the years meant this was not up for debate. Kivnal disappeared into the ship while Gordon continued loading supplies, forcing himself to move at a normal pace. His heart hammered against his ribs. They had been so careful. False identity codes, cash transactions, staying off the grid. How had the Vorathi found them? He was sealing the last cargo container when he heard heavy footsteps behind him. Human. The voice was deep and resonant, the accent placing emphasis on strange syllables. We would speak with you. Gordon turned slowly. 3 Vorathi warriors stood in the docking bay, each one massive and covered in ceremonial armor. They carried weapons that looked like they could punch through hull plating. But they had not drawn them. The lead warrior was studying Gordon with an intensity that made his skin crawl. The alien's eyes were lighter than Kivnal's, almost silver. Scars crossed the visible fur on the arms and neck. This was a fighter who had survived many battles. I don't want trouble, Gordon said carefully. Just a hauler trying to make a living. We seek no conflict. The warrior stepped closer. We seek the Deathless One. We have tracked your ship for many cycles. We know what you carry. Gordon's hand moved toward his weapon but stopped when all 3 Vorathi tensed. He was fast but not fast enough to outdraw 3 trained warriors. His mind raced through options, all of them bad. The airlock behind him opened with a hiss. Kivnal stepped out, moving to stand beside Gordon despite the danger. The young Vorathi's posture was defensive, protective of the human who had raised him. The 3 warriors stared at Kivnal. Something passed over their faces that Gordon could not quite read. Shock? Recognition? Awe? Then the lead warrior did something Gordon never expected. He dropped to one knee and lowered his head. The other 2 warriors followed immediately, all 3 of them kneeling before Kivnal in a gesture that looked ancient and formal. Deathless One, the lead warrior said, and his voice carried a weight of reverence that made Gordon's hair stand on end. The prophecy was true. You survived the trial of death and the walker in death brought you back from the dark realm. Kivnal's ears flattened in confusion. I do not understand. You should not be kneeling. You should be... The prophecy is 10,000 years old, the warrior interrupted, still not raising his head. It speaks of one who would survive what cannot be survived, returned by a being who walks through death without dying. You, Kivnal the Deathless, and him. The warrior's eyes shifted to Gordon, the uncle of death. Gordon felt the world tilt sideways. Around the docking bay, other beings had noticed what was happening. Whispers spread through the crowd. More Vorathi appeared from other parts of the station, drawn by something Gordon did not understand. They saw Kivnal and the kneeling warriors, and one by one they too dropped to their knees. Kivnal looked at Gordon with wide, frightened eyes. Gordon reached out and took his hand, squeezing it in the gesture of comfort they had developed over the years. "I think," Gordon said slowly, "we're going to need a longer conversation." The lead warrior finally raised his head, and Gordon saw tears tracking through the fur on the alien's face. "Deathless One, Uncle of Death, the Varathi High Council summons you. The time of prophecy has come, and all must witness what you have become." The Varathi flagship Endless Night was beautiful in the way that dangerous things were beautiful. Gordon stood in an observation deck, watching stars slide past as the massive warship moved through space with impossible grace. The interior was all dark stone and bioluminescent crystals that cast everything in shades of blue and purple. Every surface was carved with intricate patterns that seemed to move in the shifting light. Kivnal stood beside him, one hand pressed against the transparent wall. The young Varathi had been quiet since they boarded 3 days ago. Gordon understood. Kivnal had spent 5 years believing he was alone, the only one of his kind in human space. Now he was surrounded by thousands of his own species, and it was overwhelming. "They keep staring at me," Kivnal said quietly. "Everywhere I go, they stop and stare. They think you're special. The prophecy thing." Gordon kept his voice low even though they were alone. "You okay with all this?" Kivnal's ears twitched, a gesture Gordon recognized as uncertainty. "I do not know what I am okay with anymore, Uncle. These are my people, but they feel like strangers. You are not my blood, but you feel like family." He paused. "Is that wrong?" Gordon felt his throat tighten. "No, kid. That's not wrong at all." The door behind them opened. General Vothram entered, the warrior who had knelt in the docking bay. He wore less armor now, his silver fur visible beneath a simple uniform. Over the past 3 days, he had served as their guide and protector aboard the ship. "The High Mother will see you now," Vothram said. "Both of you." They followed him through corridors that seemed to shift and change. Varathi crew members stopped whatever they were doing to watch Kivnal pass, dropping their heads in respect. Some reached out as if to touch him but pulled back at the last moment, afraid or reverent or both. The council chamber was carved from a single piece of dark stone that reflected no light at all. It made Gordon feel like he was floating in space. Around the edges of the room sat dozens of Varathi, all of them old if the silver in their fur was any indication. At the center, elevated on a platform of crystal, sat the oldest Varathi Gordon had ever seen. High Mother Selvana looked like she had been alive since the dawn of time. Her fur was pure white, her body thin with age, but her eyes were sharp and calculating. She studied Gordon and Kivnal with an intensity that made Gordon want to check if he was armed. He was not. They had taken his weapons before boarding. "Approach," Selvana said. Her voice carried through the chamber without echoing. Gordon and Kivnal walked forward. The gathered council members watched in silence. "Kivnal the Deathless," Selvana said. "Do you know why you were placed upon the trial vessel?" Kivnal's ears flattened. "To die. Because I was weak." A murmur ran through the council. Selvana raised one hand and silence fell immediately. "No," she said. "You were placed upon the trial vessel because you were Varathi. Because for 10,000 years every Varathi cub has undergone the trial of death. We placed them upon the ships with no food, no water, no comfort. For 60 days they faced death alone. Those who survive return to us proven strong and worthy. Those who die were not meant to continue our bloodline." Gordon felt rage building in his chest. "That's murder." Every eye in the room turned to him. Several council members growled low in their throats. Vothram moved closer, ready to intervene. But Selvana simply nodded. "To you, yes. To us, it is survival of the fittest. It is how we ensure only the strong carry our species forward. It is our most sacred tradition." "It's child abuse dressed up in tradition," Gordon said, knowing he was probably signing his death warrant but unable to stop. "You throw away children and call it culture." "Uncle, please," Kivnal whispered. But Gordon could hear agreement in his voice. Selvana studied Gordon for a long moment. "How did you raise the Deathless One?" Gordon blinked at the change of subject. "What? You found him dying. You took him. How did you teach him? What trials did he endure under your care?" Gordon looked at Kivnal, confused. "I didn't give him trials. I just raised him. Fed him, taught him things, kept him safe while he grew." The council erupted. Varathi voices filled the chamber in what sounded like angry debate. Gordon caught words like impossible and weakness and heresy. Selvana silenced them again. "Explain your methods, human. How does your species raise young? Gordon struggled to find words. We protect them. We teach them gradually. We show them they have value before we ask them to prove it. He gestured helplessly. We love them. More angry voices. One council member stood, fur bristling. You made him soft. You should have tested his strength, pushed him to his limits, forced him to survive on his own. He was dying, Gordon shouted back. He was a baby who needed help, not another test to fail. Kivnall suddenly stepped forward, moving between Gordon and the angry council. I will speak. The chamber went silent. I remember the trial vessel, Kivnall said, his voice steady despite the tremor Gordon could see in his hands. I remember the cold, the hunger, the fear. I remember other cubs around me dying one by one. I remember thinking that I must be bad, that I must be wrong, because I could not survive alone. He paused. I was 3 years old and I was ready to die, believing I was worthless. Tears rolled down his face, soaking into the fur. Gordon moved to comfort him, but Kivnall held up a hand, asking him to wait. Then Uncle found me. He could have left me there. Your laws meant nothing to him. Your traditions were not his concern. But he saw a child dying alone, and he decided that was wrong. Kivnall looked around the chamber. He taught me that I had value before I proved anything. He taught me that being strong means protecting those weaker than yourself. He taught me that survival is better when you do not face it alone. Kivnall turned to face Sylvana directly. I am deathless not because I survived your trial. I am deathless because a human looked at a dying cub that you had thrown away and said, no, this one deserves to live. That is why your prophecy speaks of me. Not because I am strong, but because I was shown I had worth even when I was weak. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Sylvana leaned forward. And you believe you are stronger for his methods? You believe compassion made you more capable than our trials would have? I know I am, Kivnall said simply. Because Uncle taught me I was worth saving, I became someone worth being. Your cubs fight to survive. I learned to survive so I could protect others. That is the difference. Gordon felt pride swelling in his chest, so strong it hurt. One of the council members stood, an older male with scars crossing his face. This is weakness talking. The soft skin has corrupted you with his gentle ways. You survived the trial through luck, nothing more. I survived the trial because someone loved me. Kivnall shot back. How many of your cubs would have survived if someone had been there to help them? How many died because you valued tradition over life? The chamber erupted again. Council members were on their feet, shouting at each other. Some seemed moved by Kivnall's words. Others were furious. Gordon watched them argue and wondered if he and Kivnall would leave this ship alive. Sylvana stood, and the sound of her movement brought instant silence. Kivnall the Deathless. Gordon Reeves, Uncle of Death. She looked at them both with those ancient eyes. You have done something no Varathi has done in 10,000 years. You made one of our cubs believe he deserved to live before he proved his strength. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. The question now facing this council is whether that makes you heretics to be destroyed, or prophets to be heard. She sat back down slowly. We will deliberate. You will wait. And when we decide what you represent to our people, we will call you back. Vothrim stepped forward and gently guided Gordon and Kivnall from the chamber. As they left, Gordon heard the council explode into heated debate behind them. In the corridor, Kivnall leaned against the wall, exhausted. Gordon pulled him into a hug. You did good in there, kid. Real good. I was scared, Uncle. Me too. But you spoke the truth, and that's all we can do. Gordon held him tighter. Whatever they decide, we face it together. Understand? Kivnall nodded against his shoulder. Together. They stood there holding each other while an entire civilization argued about whether love was strength or weakness, and whether a human who saved one dying child had started a revolution or committed the greatest heresy in Varathi history. The meditation garden was the strangest place Gordon had ever seen. Floating crystals drifted through the air, glowing with soft light. Plants grew in impossible spirals from the floor and ceiling, their leaves making music when they touched. Water flowed upward in streams that defied gravity, creating patterns that hurt to look at too long. It was beautiful and alien and made Gordon feel very far from home. Kivnall sat on a stone bench staring at his hands. 3 days had passed since their appearance before the High Council. 3 days of waiting while the Varathi argued about what to do with them. Gordon had spent most of that time with Kivnall, trying to keep the young Varathi's spirits up while his own anxiety gnawed at him. Uncle, Kivnal said quietly, what if they decide we are wrong? What if they say I should have died on that ship? Gordon sat down beside him. Then they're fools and we'll deal with it. But kid, you need to understand something. What they decide doesn't change the truth. You deserve to live. Every cub on that death ship deserved to live. Their law doesn't change that. But it is their culture. Who am I to say it is wrong? You're someone who nearly died because of it. That gives you the right to have an opinion. Gordon put his hand on Kivnal's shoulder. Culture isn't sacred just because it's old. If a culture kills children and calls it tradition, then that culture needs to change. Before Kivnal could respond, Vothrim entered the garden. The warrior looked tired, his fur disheveled. The council summons you. They have reached a decision. Gordon and Kivnal exchanged glances, then followed Vothrim back to the council chamber. The walk felt longer than before. Gordon's heart hammered against his ribs. He had no weapons, no leverage, no power here. If the Vorathi decided they were heretics, there was nothing he could do to protect Kivnal. The council chamber was even more crowded than before. Every seat was filled, and more Vorathi stood along the walls. Gordon recognized ship crew members, engineers, even what looked like civilians. Word had spread about what was happening, and everyone wanted to witness the decision. High Mother Selvana sat on her crystal platform, looking even older than before. The debate had clearly taken its toll. Kivnal the Deathless. Gordon Reeves, Uncle of Death, approach. They walked forward. Gordon forced himself to stand straight, to show no fear, even though he was terrified. This council has debated for 3 cycles, Selvana said. We have examined the prophecy. We have studied your actions. We have considered what it means that a human saved a Vorathi cub using methods completely opposite to our traditions. She paused. The council is divided. Some believe you are heretics who have corrupted our ways. Others believe you are the fulfillment of prophecy. We cannot reach agreement. Gordon felt his stomach drop. A divided council probably meant a compromise solution that would satisfy no one. Therefore, Selvana continued, we have decided to test the human way. Gordon blinked. Test it how? An older male council member stood. Gordon recognized him as one of those who had argued against them. You claim your methods of raising cubs produces stronger results than our trial of death. You claim compassion and protection create better warriors than hardship and survival. Prove it. I don't understand, Kivnal said. A new trial vessel launches in 2 cycles, Selvana explained. 30 cubs will board as tradition demands. They will face 60 days alone in the void. She looked directly at Gordon. We will allow you and Kivnal to board with them. You will teach them your human methods. If more cubs survive with your help than typically survive alone, we will consider that perhaps the prophecy calls for change. If they do not, then we will know the old ways are correct. Gordon's mind raced. And if we refuse? Then you will be marked as heretics and exiled from Vorathi space forever. Kivnal will be declared corrupted and forbidden from contact with his own species. Selvana's expression softened slightly. You would be free to leave, but you would prove that your words are empty. That you speak of compassion but will not risk yourself to demonstrate it. It was a trap. A clever, perfect trap. If they refused, they would be dismissed as cowards. If they accepted and failed, it would validate the Vorathi tradition of letting children die. But if they accepted and succeeded, how many cubs typically survive? Gordon asked. Vothrim answered, his voice heavy. On average, 10 out of 30, 2/3 mortality rate. Gordon felt sick. And you consider this acceptable? We consider it necessary, the older council member said. Only the strong should survive. Gordon looked at Kivnal. The young Vorathi's eyes were wide, frightened. But there was determination there too. They had not come this far to back down now. We accept, Gordon said. The chamber filled with noise. Some voices sounded approving. Others sounded angry. Selvana raised her hand for silence. Then it is decided. You will have 2 cycles to prepare. You may take supplies, but no weapons. No communication devices. No rescue if things go badly. Her eyes bore into Gordon's. You will be alone with 30 cubs who do not know you, who will not automatically trust you, who have been taught their entire short lives that they must survive without help. Show us your human methods work, Uncle of Death, or prove that our traditions exist for good reason. They were dismissed. Vothrim led them from the chamber in silence. Once they were alone in the corridor, the warrior stopped and turned to face them. You should not have accepted, he said quietly. The trial is cruel even when cubs face it as they are meant to. With 30 terrified children looking to you for help, it will be worse. How many cubs have you lost? Gordon asked. In these trials? How many children did you watch die? Vothrym's ears flattened. My eldest son. My youngest daughter. Both were too weak to survive. It is the way. And if someone had been there to help them, to teach them? Would they be alive now? I do not know, Vothrym admitted. Perhaps, but that is not our way. Maybe your way is wrong, Gordon said gently. Maybe it's been wrong for 10,000 years and everyone was too afraid to say it. Vothrym looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something Gordon did not expect. He removed his rank insignia and held it out. My youngest daughter's name was Tivsha. She was small like Kivnal, clever and kind. She lasted 12 days before the cold took her. His voice broke. If you can save cubs like her, if you can prove there is another way, then I will help you prepare, even if the council declares me traitor for it. Gordon took the insignia carefully. Thank you. Over the next 2 days, Vothrym helped them gather supplies and plan their approach. He brought them records of previous trials, showing which cubs tended to die first and why. Dehydration, hypothermia, injury, depression. The causes were many, but they all came down to the same thing. Children too young to survive alone, forced to do exactly that. Kivnal spent hours reviewing the ship's layout, figuring out how to make it livable for 30 cubs. Gordon practiced his Vorathi language, knowing he would need to communicate clearly with frightened children. On the morning of the second day, they stood in the docking bay watching the trial vessel being loaded. It was smaller than the one where Gordon had found Kivnal, but the design was the same. Small chambers, minimal life support, no food stores. A ship designed for death. I am scared, Uncle, Kivnal admitted. Me too, kid. But we're going to save as many of those cubs as we can, because that's what's right, regardless of what tradition says. Families were bringing their cubs to the docking bay. Gordon watched Vorathi parents hand over 3-year-old children, their faces stoic even as their cubs cried and clung to them. This was the moment he truly understood how deeply this tradition ran. These parents loved their children, he could see that. But they believed the trial was necessary for the species to survive. One by one, 30 small Vorathi cubs were loaded onto the ship. They cried for their parents. They begged not to go, and their parents turned away, faces hard following 10,000 years of tradition. Gordon and Kivnal boarded last, the airlock sealed behind them with a hiss of finality. Inside the ship, 30 terrified cubs huddled in their assigned chambers, waiting to face death alone. They did not know yet that this trial would be different. They did not know that a human and a deathless one had come to show them another way. Gordon looked at Kivnal. Ready? No. But let us begin anyway. They walked into the ship together, toward the sound of children crying in the dark, carrying nothing but supplies and the radical belief that every child deserved help to survive. Day 1 on the trial vessel was chaos. 30 cubs scattered through the ship, each one locked in their individual chamber according to tradition, crying and screaming for parents who were not coming back. The life support was minimal, the temperature already dropping toward the cold that would kill them slowly. No food, no water, just small children alone in the dark, exactly as the trial was meant to be. Gordon and Kivnal moved quickly. They had maybe 6 hours before hypothermia started affecting the smallest cubs, maybe 12 before dehydration became critical. They needed to move fast. Override the chamber locks, Gordon said, working at a control panel while Kivnal connected his tablet to the ship's systems. The young Vorathi's fingers flew over the interface, his engineering skills finally put to crucial use. Done, Kivnal said. All chambers unlocked. Gordon moved to the nearest chamber and opened the door manually. Inside, a tiny female cub with brown fur huddled in the corner, shaking with cold and fear. Her eyes went wide when she saw him. It's okay, Gordon said in Vorathi, keeping his voice soft. I'm here to help. The cub hissed at him, terrified of the strange alien creature. Kivnal appeared behind Gordon and knelt down. Do not be afraid, little one. I am Vorathi, like you. This is my uncle. We are not going to let you face this alone. The cub stared at Kivnal, processing the impossible sight of an adult Vorathi on a trial vessel. You are not supposed to be here. The trial must be faced alone. The trial is wrong, Kivnal said gently, and we are going to prove it. Will you come with us? It took 20 minutes to gather all 30 cubs into the main cargo bay. They huddled together in a frightened mass, staring at Gordon and Kivenal with confusion and terror. Some were already showing signs of hypothermia, their small bodies shivering violently. Gordon looked at the group of children and felt the weight of what they had promised to do. These cubs had been raised since birth to believe they must survive alone. Changing that belief in 60 days while keeping them all alive would be nearly impossible. "My name is Gordon," he said in Varathi, speaking slowly so they could understand. "This is Kivenal. We know you are scared. We know you think you are supposed to be alone. But there is another way to be strong, and we are going to teach you." A larger male cub stepped forward, his dark fur bristling. "You are breaking the trial. We are supposed to survive on our own. That is the law." "The law is wrong," Gordon said simply. "You are 3 years old. You should not have to die to prove you deserve to live. But if we do not survive alone, we are weak," a small female said, her voice shaking. Kivenal moved to stand beside Gordon. "I was on a trial vessel like this. I was dying alone and cold exactly like you are now. Uncle found me and saved me. He taught me there is strength in accepting help. He taught me there is courage in protecting those weaker than yourself." He gestured to his own body, strong and healthy. "Do I look weak to you?" The cubs stared at him, unable to argue with the evidence standing before them. "Here is what we are going to do," Gordon said. "First we get you warm. Then we get you fed. Then we teach you how to survive together instead of alone. And in 60 days, when this ship docks again, you will all walk off alive and strong. That is my promise to you." They started with immediate needs. Gordon distributed thermal blankets, while Kivenal worked on increasing the life support output. They set up a central living area where all the cubs could stay together, using cargo containers to create walls that held heat. Food was the bigger problem. The ship had no stores. Gordon had brought compressed rations, but not enough for 30 growing cubs for 60 days. They would need to be creative. "The ship has an emergency recycling system," Kivenal said, studying the schematics. "It's designed to reclaim water from the atmosphere. If I can modify it, we might be able to produce nutrient paste." "How long?" 3 days of work. "Maybe 4. Do it. I'll ration what we have until then." The first week was brutal. The cubs did not trust easily. Some refused to eat, believing they were supposed to suffer. Others fought over resources, their survival instincts making them aggressive. Gordon broke up fights and comforted crying children and barely slept. But slowly, things began to change. The smallest cubs, those who would have died first in a traditional trial, started following Gordon around. They learned that he would feed them when they were hungry, warm them when they were cold, comfort them when they were scared. They started calling him Uncle, imitating Kivenal. The larger, more aggressive cubs took longer to come around. But Kivenal worked with them, teaching them that protecting the weak ones made the whole group stronger. He showed them how working together could solve problems that would kill an individual. On day 15, they had their first crisis. A cub named Real Talk got sick, a respiratory infection that came from the cold. In a normal trial, this would be a death sentence. The cub would weaken and die within days. Gordon stayed up for 2 nights straight, monitoring the cub's condition and administering what limited medicine he had. The other cubs watched anxiously. They had grown attached to each other over the past 2 weeks, and the idea of losing one of their group hit hard. On the 3rd night, Real Talk's fever broke. The cub opened his eyes and asked for water. The other cubs cheered, piling on top of each other in relief and joy. That was the turning point. The cubs finally understood that this was not a trick or a weakness. This was a different kind of strength. By day 30, the group had transformed. They worked together to maintain the ship. They shared resources without fighting. They took care of the smaller cubs without being asked. They had become a family. Gordon watched them play one evening, wrestling and laughing in the way children should be allowed to do. Kivenal sat beside him, looking content. "They are going to survive," Kivenal said. "All of them?" "Yeah," Gordon agreed. "They are." On day 60, the trial vessel docked. The airlock opened, and the Vorthi High Council waited outside along with hundreds of observers. They had come to see how many cubs survived the human method. High Mother Selvana stood at the front, her ancient eyes sharp with curiosity. Gordon stepped out first, then Kivenal. Then one by one, 30 cubs walked out behind them. Not the terrified, scattered individuals who had boarded. These cubs walked together, helping the smaller ones, moving as a unit. They were healthy, they were strong, they were all alive. The silence in the docking bay was absolute. In 10,000 years of trials, no group had ever had a 100% survival rate. It was impossible. It was unprecedented. It was proof. Selvana stepped forward, staring at the cubs. "All 30, she said, her voice barely audible. "You saved all 30. "We taught them to save each other," Gordon corrected. "That's the difference." The High Mother looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to address the gathered crowd. "The prophecy has been fulfilled. The Deathless One has returned, and the Uncle of Death has shown us a new way. The Council must now decide if tradition is more important than the lives of our children." Vothram stepped forward from the crowd. "High Mother, if I may speak?" She nodded permission. "My daughter died on a trial vessel 12 years ago. She was small and weak, and the cold took her." His voice carried through the silent bay. "Today I watched 30 cubs survive, including 5 who were smaller and weaker than she was. I watched them live because someone taught them they deserved to live." He removed his ceremonial armor and knelt. "The old way took my child. The new way saved children just like her. I know which one I support." One by one, other Varathi began to kneel. Parents who had lost cubs to the trial. Warriors who remembered their own suffering. Even some council members joined them, but not all. A faction remained standing, led by the older male who had challenged them before. "This is heresy," he shouted. 10,000 years of tradition cannot be overturned because a soft skin made cubs dependent on help. "They are not dependent," Kivanal said, his voice strong. "They are stronger because they know they do not face the universe alone. That is not weakness. That is the strength of community." The cub Real Talk, the one Gordon had saved from sickness, stepped forward. "I would have died in a normal trial, I know this. But Uncle taught me that being small does not mean being worthless. He taught me that asking for help is not failure. He taught me that surviving together means everyone gets to survive." The small cub looked at the standing faction. "Is that really so terrible?" The debate that followed lasted for days. The Varathi were not a species that changed easily, but slowly a new consensus began to form. The trial would not be abandoned entirely. The Varathi still valued strength and independence, but perhaps some argued, true strength meant choosing to help others even when you did not have to. A compromise was reached. The trial would continue, but modified. Adult guides would accompany the cubs, not to make them soft, but to teach them that survival was better as a community. Cubs would still be tested, but they would be given the tools to succeed rather than being left to die. It was not perfect. Some traditionalists refused to accept any change, but it was progress. Gordon stood with Kivanal on the observation deck of the Endless Night 3 months later, watching a new trial vessel launch. This time, 2 Varathi adults were aboard to guide the cubs through the 60 days. Vothram was one of them, volunteering to help the next generation learn the new way. "Do you think it will work?" Kivanal asked. "This balance between old and new?" "I don't know," Gordon admitted. "But it's better than throwing children away and calling it culture." Kivanal leaned against him, the gesture of affection they had shared for years. "Thank you, Uncle, for saving me, for teaching me, for changing everything." Gordon put his arm around the tall Varathi. "You changed it, kid. You survived and became proof that there was a better way. I just helped a little." News had spread beyond Varathi space. Gordon had become something of a legend in frontier regions. The human who walked into death and brought back life. The Uncle of Death who taught an entire species about compassion. People told stories about him, most of them wildly inaccurate. He did not care about the legends. He cared that cubs like Kivanal would have a better chance now. He cared that maybe slowly an ancient culture was learning that strength and kindness were not opposites. 6 months later, Gordon and Kivanal prepared to leave. The long haul had been repaired and upgraded, a gift from the Varathi Council. They had cargo contracts waiting and a life to return to. As they walked to their ship, cubs ran up to say goodbye. 30 cubs they had saved, plus others who had heard the stories and wanted to meet the Uncle of Death. Gordon hugged them all, ruffled fur, and promised to visit. Vothram met them at the airlock. The warrior had changed over the past months, softer around the edges but no less strong. The cubs from the modified trial are returning next week. 28 survived. It is not perfect, but it is better. It's a start, Gordon said. That's all anyone can ask. They shook hands, human and Vorathi, united by a shared belief that children deserved better than being thrown away. Gordon and Kivnal boarded the long haul. As they pulled away from the endless night, Kivnal looked back at the Vorathi fleet. "Will you miss them?" Gordon asked. "Some of them. But Uncle, you are my family. Wherever you go, that is home for me." Gordon felt tears sting his eyes. "Right back at you, kid." The long haul jumped to hyperspace carrying a human cargo hauler and a Vorathi who had survived what should have killed him. Behind them, an entire civilization slowly began to change, learning that sometimes the strongest thing you could do was admit your ancestors were wrong. In the years that followed, the modified trial became standard. Mortality rates dropped from 67% to less than 5%. Vorathi cubs grew up knowing they had value before they proved it. The species became softer in some ways but stronger in others, and on frontier stations across known space, beings told stories about Uncle Death, the human who walked through the dark realm and brought back a child that was never supposed to survive. The man who challenged an entire culture with nothing but compassion and stubbornness. Gordon never thought of himself as a hero. He had just done what he thought was right. He had seen a dying child and decided that was not acceptable. Regardless of what ancient laws said, sometimes that was enough to change the universe. The long haul flew on through the stars carrying its small family of 2, proof that the bonds between beings were stronger than species, stronger than tradition, and strong enough to overturn 10,000 years of darkness with one simple act of kindness.